The category is What the Trans, darling.
Hello, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans, we're back.
We are back. We have been away, but we're now back. How are you, Michelle?
I'm good. I've been fairly busy over the last month. I went to a uni reunion, which was interesting. By the way, hello to the listeners I now know are out there in Aberystwyth, my old uni town.
Ah, lovely. The alma mater. Yes, indeed, you mentioned that to me, so...
Yeah, it was really cool because I went there and I was terrified in a lot of ways because, you know, I was a certain way at uni.
Yes, and you are different now.
Things have changed. Things have changed considerably, and I didn't know who I was going to run into there. I didn't know what that was going to be like. I don't think I've even been to Wales since I transitioned, I don't think, so I had no idea what was going to happen. And then I ran into this lovely guy called Jason, who... He is involved with the Rock Society, where I spent a lot of my days, because, you know, metal, punk, that's my thing. And it turns out that half of the committee of the Aberystwyth Rock Sock is now trans or non-binary. I had nothing to worry about at all.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible there. So hello to all of the people in Aberystwyth who are listening, who I've been told exist.
Yeah, but she's my girlfriend. But no, you can't meet her. She goes to another uni. Yes, I'm sure they do. And hello to all of Michelle's old comrades. Was that a surprise or what? Logically, I guess I would have a uni reunion coming up at some point, but I've not been paying attention. And if I saw one, I'd be like, oh no. So. But that,
I'd advise you go because it was fucking awesome walking around my old uni town and seeing all the sites, like seeing where the Bay was. People who went to Aberystwyth for a certain time will know what the Bay is. The Glen, which is now really posh. The Scholars, the Student Union.
You see, the thing is that your uni town was Aberystwyth, which is on the coast and all that sort of thing, which has got a kind of bleak majesty to it. I have been to Aberystwyth, so I'm not just talking out of my arse there. But my uni town was Preston, which just doesn't have much to recommend it. Full stop, really.
Yeah, Preston hasn't got the same kind of thing with it. Like, I mean,
it's not on the coast.
I don't want to make this the...
Yeah, my uni was better than yours.
I don't want to make this the Aberystwyth show, but for people that don't know, this is what Aberystwyth is. When a friend of mine was returning from summer break one year, he was going along with his sister in the car, and he just turned to her and said, look, I'm just going to give you a heads up. Aberystwyth is a bit strange. Just, keep that in mind. And the first thing the pair of them saw when coming over the hill leading down to Aberystwyth was a skinhead in a leather miniskirt walking a ferret.
Well, yeah, there you go.
That's all you need to know.
It's its own place, isn't it?
But yeah, how are you doing?
Okay, yes, change of employment status. So that's been a bit more of a faff than I perhaps wanted at this point. But yes, my contract at MIF came to an end, as I always knew it was going to, actually, because it was a fixed-term contract. That's how they work. But that has left me, obviously, without a job. So I've got a lot more free time, which is great. But I am also compelled to spend a certain amount of that time looking for jobs, or I won't get my universal credit, which I still haven't received because, of course, I haven't. So I am starving, and I don't know where my rent's going to come from this month. But yeah, aside from that, everything's fine. That's other stuff is happening. Obviously, irons are in the fire, and all the kind of volunteering-y and sessional work type stuff that I do, mostly for the LGBT Foundation, has kind of come up, and they're like, oh, well, while you're free, can you come and help us with this thing? And I'm like, yes, cool. Can I get paid for it, please? So, and they're very good about that. They said yes, and very nice of them. So, yeah, but the other thing that I spent the last few weeks while we've been off air doing was I thought, oh, well, I can do an episode on my own. I'll do that. That sounds fun. And every single attempt I made at doing that was just doomed to fail, which will come on to the reasons why that is in a minute.
I think the reasons will be very clear to some people because it's like the news has been written by Armando Iannucci more now than ever. It is absurd. So
it is Yeah, absurd is absurd is the word. There feels like there's a song in there somewhere, but if there is one out there, don't let us know.
I was about to start singing it, but then I realised copyright.
Probably, yeah, and I think that's something that we should be slightly less devil may care about, or it's going to bite us in the ass at some point. So yes, let's get on with not being copyright unfriendly, and let's do the news. So this is. You're getting your money's worth out of this episode, listener, because this is going to be a chunky one. Lots of stuff going on, and particularly for our listeners in the UK, you may find some of this has already been discussed to the point of distraction, so you are welcome to skip the first segment of the podcast. So, of course, squatting over the news for the last few weeks, like the big noxious cloud that it is everybody's favourite B word. Yes, it's Brexit. So as I mentioned during the break that we just had, I was very gamely trying to keep up with what was going on so I could write a script about it for a podcast episode. The plan was I'd produce one while flying solo, focused mostly on Manchester Pride, with a bit of news stuff beforehand. But the news kept changing. Every few hours I'd finish a draft and then slope off for a crafty nap, and then come back and discover that everything had changed again. Like, can you guys please keep a lid on this chaos for just one fucking day? I am trying to write a podcast. But now that was last week, and we're a little further away from this truly spectacular level of drama that was being provided to us by the House of Commons last week, I think it's time, or it's a better time, to digest what happened and what actually has significance and what particularly the trans community might be interested in. So, in brief, racist liar and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has succeeded in suspending, or as it's called, proroguing, Parliament. MPs will now not return to the House of Commons until October, unless something else happens in the meantime, and we will come back to that. So, in brief, after Johnson announced his plan to suspend Parliament for an extended period, there was at least one high-profile defection from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats, followed by Johnson choosing then to purge 21 quote-unquote rebel MPs for being insufficiently Brexitful. The opposition, having definitely found its feet, if perhaps not both of its shoes, responded with a series of bills intended to prevent what's being called a no-deal Brexit, wherein the UK would just crash out of the EU with no kind of trade or legal agreements in place and would just kind of get on with it, with our stiff upper lip and our Dunkirk spirit and all the other British things. But obviously with no imports like food or vital medicines, so if you're diabetic or a cancer patient, I'm sorry, but this government thinks Brexit is more important than your continued existence. In amongst the chaos, Amber Rudd resigned from her positions in protest, including from her brief as the Women and Equalities Minister. We've spoken of Amber Rudd on the show before, and I'm not going to repeat myself here. So she's out and Liz Truss is in. Truss is the Secretary of State for International Trade and the President of the Board of Trade since July 2019, and she was most recently in the news for her role in inadvertent sales of weapons to the regime in Saudi Arabia, something that was banned by a court order back in June. This is now the woman responsible for the Women and Equalities brief in Parliament, a woman who accidentally sold weapons to Saudi Arabia.
We've all done it.
Absolutely. Who among us hasn't accidentally sold weapons to anywhere, really? I know I have. No. But the thing is, for how long this is all going to be the case remains to be seen. Given that the government no longer has a majority in the Commons, which is very much their own stupid fault, a lot of commentary is surrounding the possibility of another general election by the end of this year, or perhaps a second referendum, or maybe both. And additionally, the proroguing of Parliament is at this very moment being challenged in the High Court with potentially damaging consequences for Johnson and his intentions. But for the moment, Parliament does remain suspended, and Johnson has seemingly spent the last 2 weeks travelling around the country being heckled by literally everyone. So once again, when it comes to Brexit, our editorial stance here on the podcast is fucked if we know what'll happen next, but now's definitely the time to get organised, if it wasn't already. If you're in the UK and you haven't registered to vote, maybe now's the time. So, yes, that's all the weather.
Just so you know, in the description, we will provide links so you can figure out how best to register to vote. Please do.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Just not suggesting that there's anything particular that might be happening that might require that, but... please just register to vote. The strange thing, well, it's not even particularly strange when you give them the context, but the Johnson cabinet seems to actively want to exit the EU in October, no matter what chaos this is going to unleash. This no-deal Brexit seems to be the desired outcome. And I'm sure that this has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the EU legislation surrounding money laundering and offshore accounts that's coming into effect in January next year. Another thing worth noting, the far right, those lovely chaps, do love a bit of the old Johnson, lol. And when they've been heard chanting, "We love you, Boris," at their little rallies, I'm not sure this is a good sign. Having those people feel as if they've got representation in Boris at number 10, that's definitely a problem. So were you able to pay any attention to this? Did you manage to, because it was just for a week, there was an entire onslaught of this has happened in the House of Commons and now this has happened and now this has happened and this effect and the impact of that is whatever. And it was, Boris Johnson having several different people piss all over his chips, which was a delight for my blackened little heart to see. But it was very, very difficult to keep up with. And I say this from the perspective of someone who was sat at home refreshing Twitter in the news all day to specifically try and stay on top of what was happening, and it was still really hard. So, what was any of this bleeding through to you? Is it just like monumentally chaotic? What was...
I've been following it, and from what I can tell, there are many theories as to what Boris Johnson's ulterior motives are, but the simple fact is, I don't think any of us really know for sure what he's planning, because on the front of it, the message he's getting out there is, the people voted for Brexit, we're going to leave, people are sick of hearing about it. Which, as a political strategy to get people behind you, that will get a whole bunch of people there. That will get a lot of people fired up to support him and his nonsense. But also there's a lot of people sort of tinfoil hatting, saying that, this is about doing X, Y, or Z. Basically just what you said. I have no idea what his game is. All I know is that he appears to be driving the car into a wall as fast as possible to please the people who are screaming, "Crash the car! Crash the car!" And if somebody's screaming, "Crash the car," maybe don't listen to them because they don't know that crashing cars sucks.
Yeah, it's a bad idea. And likewise, crashing an economy and a healthcare system and all sorts of things. So there was the document that was released and was again derided as, it's scaremongering, it's Project Fear. And it was actually the government's own document about what they've called Project Yellowhammer.
I did hear about this.
Yeah. So that's the emergency preparations for in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And the assessment for this is... well, to call it bleak would be quite an understatement, and it's talking literally every single subject that it tackles in terms of waits at Calais and Dover for imports and exports, and medicine supplies, civil unrest, every single thing that it examines and puts it in the context of a no-deal Brexit, it says this is a bad idea. So, and yet here we are still careering down this cliff. And it's actually been kind of actively stressful. And you do wonder I have wondered how much of that is deliberate. Like, just kind of bombard the electorate with so much stuff they stop caring and then you can get away with whatever you like. Although, having said that, on the face of it, thus far, Johnson and his cronies genuinely have kind of gotten away with more or less. Actually, no, that does fly in the face of what I said earlier on about chips being pissed on.
Well, there's been a lot of chip pissing.
Definitely. I mean, Amber Rudd stepping down from the government and from her party is probably the most relevant thing to the trans and non-binary communities out there because she's the one who's supposed to be leading the charge on GRA reform, or at the very least looking into that. Well, she was.
She's not there.
Yeah.
It's now a whole other person, Liz Truss, who I don't know that much about, apart from she has had some pretty dodgy dealings with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And did she vote against gay marriage?
I think I read that somewhere. I can't remember, but honestly, I probably should have done a bit more research about it, because I'd sort of stopped at the stuff from literally yesterday as we record this, which is talking about how she accidentally sold weapons to the Saudis, and it's like, wow.
Oh, I just Googled it, and she did vote for gay marriage.
Okay, all right. So, fine.
That seems to be the litmus test for a lot of the people that get this brief, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so, but we're kind of horse trading on morality here. It's like, okay, so she voted in favour of same-sex marriage, but then also just went straight ahead and illegally sold weapons to a regime which imprisons, beats, and no doubt does all sorts of other terrible things to LGBT people. And it's like, well, which one of these things is true? You know,
well, people could take multitudes.
They could.
I myself have accidentally, sold arms to people whilst also at the same time helping people move house. I'm a very complicated woman.
So, I mean, there's a whole chapter of your life I just don't seem to know anything about, but that's fine. The potential for harm here, as we've mentioned before, is significant, I think. And while we don't want to focus on this one thing too much, like literally every other news outlet has been doing recently, but the key point in terms of, as you say, trans rights and trans reform, that brief is with Liz Truss, and I have very little trust in her actually doing this in the kind of empathic and progressive way that we want. You can just see
and even if she does want to, it's up in the air whether Johnson would even go for it, because as we've covered before, he's employed Andrew Gilligan, former shit goblin from the Times, as a transport advisor, who his views on trans people are well known.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously it won't be his brief, but he's there in the room, and the cabinet being made up of all of these people who collect every kind of prejudice and horrible thing you can imagine. You got racists, you got sexists, you got homophobes, you got transphobes. You've got basically a big old kaleidoscope of dickheads, as I've previously said before, in the cabinet. So who even knows if Liz Truss is down with trans people, whether it would get through in the first place. And that's assuming that this government will survive all of this nonsense, which is looking incredibly likely it won't. So who the fuck knows? We can't tie this one up in a bow, dear listener. We can't do what we usually do and try and give you some links and stuff to try and help out, or try and tie it up with some kind of editorial line, because we just don't know, because nobody fucking knows anything.
Yeah. And that's the editorial stance of What the Trans. Nobody fucking knows anything. So moving on. Let's go to some things that we do know, that we can report on quite definitively.
Yeah, I've got some good news.
Yeah, I know you do. I'm prompting you to read it out.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get the hint. All right, let me try this. Now in much, much better news, former Stonewall CEO and incredible trans ally Ruth Hunt has been made a peer in the House of Lords.
Woo!
Yeah. Good on her. Hunt became the CEO of Stonewall in 2014, and it was under her leadership that Stonewall went from a campaigning organisation for LGB issues to also campaigning on transgender issues. She has also been incredibly outspoken about her support for trans people and has done incredible work in trying to tackle the hardships that trans people face. She was named a crossbench life peer, meaning that she will be a member of the House of Lords for life, but she is not tied to any political party, and she will have full voting rights in the House of Lords. Now, for people that don't know, the House of Lords is the second chamber of the Houses of Parliament, where through a variety of ways, members are given lifetime appointments where they can vote on the passage of legislation. To put it simply, laws are devised and voted on in the House of Commons by MPs who are voted for by the UK people, and then those laws are voted on in the House of Lords by peers who are given their seats by the Prime Minister and various political parties through various means. So the House of Lords is technically democratic in that the people vote for people who are able to assign peerages, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Obviously, having a trans ally in the House of Lords is a huge win for the community, and it is a testament to the work Ruth has done. So if you're listening, Ruth, congratulations and Godspeed. Enjoy those glorious, glorious hallways and
robes,
wonderful dinners they serve in the House of Lords.
Yeah, and the robes. There's got to be robes, right? If they say, okay, come into the House of Lords, they must give you a robe. Surely.
I don't know for sure. There's a whole, parliamentary way of doing things that from the outside looks completely silly. An old hat, with robes and scepters and God knows what. So Ruth probably has a whole bunch of robes and stuff and old parchments full of medieval texts and whatever they get when they get in the House of Lords. It's a very silly institution, our government, in the way it works. It's kind of like Westeros meets, again, anything Armando Iannucci has written, I think.
Nice. Can you imagine the thick of it in Game of Thrones land?
Well, that has to exist.
I know, right?
Go write it, you've got the time. Go become a TV writer and write that show. I would watch the shit out of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it'd probably work for a couple of sketches. I'm not sure it would be an actual show. Anyway, no, you're quite right. The House of Lords, and it has long been criticised by the people in the UK that would see the monarchy abolished. because the people who are in there are unelected. And as you mentioned, there are a number of different ways of people getting in there, and some of those ways could be open to abuse, essentially. And so there's a whole thing about the House of Lords. However, in this instance, we're not going to criticise it too much, because there's that whole thing that people argue for, whereby we work within the system and change it from the inside. And I honestly, for that being a possibility, I can't think of a better person to be placed within the House of Lords.
Well, she's still going to be doing a full-time job. She's working for a company consulting on equality and stuff like that. And most of the House of Lords peers have jobs. Like, it's not like with an MP where they are full-time. They're not even required to show up for half the votes. Like, there was a famous case of Andrew Lloyd Webber, who has become a peer in the House of Lords, alarmingly. He didn't vote in the House of Lords for like 10 years and then flew back for one time to vote down like raising nurses' wages or something. I could have got the issue wrong, but basically something
cartoonishly villainous. Yeah,
he literally flew in from the States to vote for something kind of evil. And Ruth could totally do the same thing, but knowing Ruth Hunt, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Ruth Hunt's going to turn up, and God bless her, another trans supportive voice in the House of Lords. That's always a win.
Pretty much. So, yes, as you say, good luck, Godspeed, and yes, I hope you'll fuck shit up in the House of Lords as well. In a nice way, obviously. I don't mean just going in and smashing up all the fittings, as much fun as that would be. But yes, it's great to see such a staunch ally there in the House of Lords representing the interests of the community. So, good news. What's next?
Yeah, next to the, by far, the sexiest segment that this show has ever had.
I'm rubbing my knees with anticipation.
Oh, we are really earning our explicit badge this time.
I'm gonna have to sit on my hands.
The census.
Yeah! Oh, sorry, I just splooshed. Anyway.
Yes, the census. The thing that the government does to count how many of us there are. The government has now confirmed that the 2021 census of the UK will include a question on gender identity for the first time. This means that the government and the Office for National Statistics will be able to provide accurate information about how many trans and non-binary people there actually are. For those who don't know, the UK government performs a head count of everyone in the UK, so they know how many of us there are. The idea is that the government and other agencies can then use this data to better provide services for the UK population. Until now, the UK trans population has been, at best, incredibly educated guesswork. But now, for the first time, we'll have hard data on us, or at the very least, data on people who are openly trans and willing to admit it on the census. The announcement was made recently by the Office for National Statistics in the run-up to a census rehearsal due to take place in the autumn. In the rehearsal, there will be a question about the person's sex, which has been included in every census since 1801, and that question will remain unchanged, but will now have some added guidance for those who are trans, non-binary and intersex on how to answer the question. On the Office for National Statistics website, they offered the following guidance. The sex question on the census will be mandatory, so will need to be answered by all. However, for those whose gender is different from their sex registered at birth, who may find the question difficult to answer, the answer they provide does not need to be the same as their birth certificate. The gender identity question, however, will be all new and will be voluntary. The question will be worded as, is your gender the same as the sex you registered at birth? And you will have the option to write yes, no, or to write in your own answer. Now, usually the census is sent around as one per household and everyone in the household fills it in. But they do offer the option to fill in a personal form if you do not want to reveal this information to the rest of the household. And we will provide links for this when the census happens. How awesome is this?
Yes, it's good. I know, didn't we report on the Scottish government not including those questions in the census, or am I getting a bit mixed up with something else?
I think that was in reference to the Scotland census, yes, which apparently is different from the United Kingdom census, which this will be.
Yes.
Yeah, they're going to be doing the rehearsal, which is basically testing out the whole thing and working out any of the kinks and stuff in the wording of the questions. That's going to be done in a few places, including Ceredigion in Wales and in North London and a few other places scattered around. So
if you're trying to convince somebody, a government agency or whatever, that there is a problem or that a community is underserved or whatever, you need data on it. Unfortunately, that's how it's been constructed, and people won't do anything unless you can back it up with numbers. And so every 10 years we do the numbers. And so I was interested to hear about the personal form kind of thing, although I do wonder how that might work in practice, because with the potentially non-supportive parents of an LGB or T person know that a personal form has been issued. And I don't know. It seems like they might.
I don't think so. It's very much. It'll basically just be sent to you in an envelope. So unless the person is checking the other person's mail, I don't think it's going to be an issue. And the other important thing to note is that when it comes to the sex question, which is still binary, that your answer does not have to be the same as your birth certificate. That is the important thing. So, for example, I do not have a gender recognition certificate.
Neither do I.
At present, because that's a lot of money I don't have and a lot of time and mental health and other stuff that I just don't have to spare. So, in theory, it could be argued that I should put down male, because that was the sex assigned to me at birth by some very unhelpful doctors. But, as it said here, I can totally tick female and then fill in the gender identity section that I am a transgender woman, and this does not reflect my designation at birth. So the government will have statistics on who is trans, what they were assigned at birth, and what they are now, and they will be able to, and that should hopefully cover all the bases for dealing with healthcare stuff, because there were some concerns raised about like having all the trans people tick the thing, but then not being able to take into account, how their body began as such. But this seems to cover all of those bases from where I'm standing. What do you think?
No, I would agree, and that seems to be an acceptable way to capture that, bearing in mind the census data when it's sort of published. It's not like they publish all the identifiable information and leave everybody's names attached to it. That would be grievously problematic. So I think as an information gathering exercise, I think this captures stuff that it simply hasn't in previous years. And the fact that they're making an effort to do this, again, the government at the moment seems so grievously conflicted, because the people high up are obviously not caring too much about LGB and trans rights specifically, given that the GRA reform just keeps getting kicked further down the line. But then clearly someone in the government and or civil service is just kind of getting on with it and saying, okay, so we'll change this and we'll do this differently next time and blah, 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 and making it look very, very friendly and progressive and thoughtful, even though the leadership quite demonstrably isn't. It's very weird. But I welcome.
Well, the main difference is that the Office for National Statistics.
Yes,
I keep saying it wrong. They are a civil service.
Yeah, they're not party political. I'm aware of that. It's like the Government Equalities Office. It's ostensibly free of party control because it is a part of the civil service, which is going to be getting on with doing stuff no matter which colour rosette is in number 10. So, but yes, this is a good move, and I'm sure people will be quite happy to point out why I'm wrong in that. However, I think in terms of trying to establish what the problems might be, we need kind of numbers on how many of us there are and all that kind of caper.
Yeah, we will keep you up to date on any developments in this, and we will provide links in the description so you can check out for yourself all the guidance and the wording of the questions specifically, if that is what you are into. And we don't kink shame here. If you are into the census in a sexual way, we celebrate your sexual identity.
Absolutely. It's similar to someone I met quite recently who had a fetish for jurisprudence, and they got off on a technicality. Now,
oh, that is the funniest thing you've ever said. I mean, the bar was high because you're funny as fuck, but that was genuinely the funniest thing I've ever heard you say.
I can't take credit for that line, but I will certainly
take the credit.
Well, no,
that was all you.
I heard that joke a little while ago, and I thought it was wonderful, so I tucked it away in my mind palace. So,
well done.
Thank you. Anyway, yes. So. Brilliant. I think that's as much as we could say about that. So let us move on. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the things that I was going to talk about in my aborted solo episode was Manchester Pride, which of course took place at the end of August. And a merry weekend was had by many, but certainly not all of the attendees. Now, it's a big Pride event in one of the larger cities in England. It does draw a crowd, and it draws in that crowd's money. And the way Pride has been run and set up and changed over the years has been a subject of a certain amount of criticism from various different sectors of the community for a number of different reasons. So, full disclosure, I kind of went to Pride this year. I was there for one day of it in the village. You may be aware of how Manchester's gay village works. It's in the centre of the city, and for Pride, hoardings go up all around it, and you have to pay for entry and show a wristband when you go in, and so on.
Boo hiss.
Boo hiss indeed. So it is not free. Now, in all the years up until this year, the music program that's taken place, which has seen people like Kylie and Steps and all the usual sort of thing, play in a little car park tucked away behind Portland Street in Manchester. All of them, the overwhelming majority of the music program, and particularly the big names, were moved out somewhere else, slightly further away from the village, about 200 yards away, to a place called Mayfield Depot. It's, as the name suggests, it's an old railway depot. It was also used as a postal sorting office for a while. It's one of those lovely old industrial spaces that Manchester's got loads of that have been repurposed into different things. And in this case, they do gigs there now. And, you know, again, full disclosure, at MIF, we also used that space for one of the things in Manchester International Festival 2019. It was Invisible Cities, and it was super. And also Skepta. But with that kind of splitting out of the music program and taking that somewhere slightly further away, that was a controversial move in itself. But then came the announcement of the ticket prices, which were even more controversial, to the extent that, like, a full weekend ticket, you know, including absolutely everything, including the music and access to the village and so on, was in the region of £70, which is ridiculous, frankly. But you could just buy a ticket just to go into the gay village and just kick around there and not really bother with all of the big name music stuff that was happening over at Mayfield, which would have been what I did were it not for the fact that I was going off and doing something else on the Sunday, which I'll come on to in a minute. But I was there for some of Manchester Pride, and so I saw kind of the preparations and the bunting and the smiling faces, and I was in the parade as one of the last things I did with MIF. We had rainbow t-shirts and everything as part of the Manchester Cultural Consortium, which was us at MIF, the Science and Industry Museum, and the National Football Museum, all walking together in a kind of walking entry. We had flags and bunting and badges that we were giving out. It was terribly fun, and actually the glorious weather that we happened to be experiencing on that weekend definitely helped. As we mentioned in Leeds a few weeks ago, there was an incident within Leeds' Pride Parade where a group of people who call themselves feminists were stood at the side of the parade route with their awful transphobic banners and leaflets and slogans and all of that sort of thing. And I feared something like that was going to happen in Manchester, but it didn't, because they pulled the trick that they pulled in London last year and jumped in at the front of the parade and were actually allowed to walk for quite a lot of the parade route, escorted by the police, with their transphobic banners and the leaflets that they were handing out. I was not aware of this at the time. Our parade walking entry was in position 133, so we were nowhere near the front, and I didn't see this happen. However, I then discovered that it happened after the fact, and that was really rather disappointing.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to what happened with Pride in London with me, where last time when I was just sat there at Leicester Square, just looking on my phone, just seeing what was going on in town, and discovered it, and it was heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, so
was it heartbreaking for you?
Yeah, it was so disappointing because of, oh yeah, great, and I knew that there were people who, so actually, several trans groups were once again kind of front and centre, you know, as you mentioned at various Pride events earlier in the year, like L with the T, G with the T, B with the T, similar things happening here. I know that mermaids were actually relatively close to the front, and so they and their parade entry, and indeed the young people who were part of it, saw some of this take place. So
brilliant.
Yeah,
that's exactly what you want.
Absolutely fantastic stuff. So that is a straight up safeguarding issue, right? A little bit of context. So last year, after the after the stuff went down in London, Manchester Pride belatedly decided that they would issue wristbands to all participants in the parade, and people who then didn't have a wristband, who might have been being disruptive in some way, could then be, escorted elsewhere by security or the police. They had wristbands again this year. I assumed they would serve the same function, but yet this group that hadn't followed the parade procedure, they hadn't paid in any way to do it, as a lot of corporate concerns have to. If you're a charity, you don't have to, but for the most part, if you want to be in the Pride Parade, you pay to do it. This lot hadn't done that. They hadn't gone through any of the submission process that you have to, yada, yada, yada. They just jumped in at the front with their offensive slogans and were allowed to walk, someone estimated it was sort of 30-40% of the route, at the front. So again, there's been this token effort made to give out these wristbands and whatever, but yet they're not it's not being enforced, so why did you bother? Other issues...
Yeah, the exact opposite happened. If you can show up with a bunch of banners, you can lead the thing. That's the precedent that's been set now.
Basically, that's where we're at. So sticking on the subject of the parade, on the Saturday, there has been an open letter, and Twitter shows stories of a number of people whose the accessible viewing area, so for people who are less able to stand or use wheelchair, which are kind of, I wouldn't say fenced off, but they're kind of, a little section where there's supposed to be a clear view for those people to be able to sit down and be able to view the parade. And it was not a clear view. The accessible viewing area was completely blocked off by people standing in front of it who were not getting moved on by the marshals or security, which again, that's kind of disappointing. That is doing a disservice to disabled people who want to come to Pride. If Pride's excluding anybody, then there's kind of no point in being there, really. I don't want to belabor the point about all of the things that Manchester Pride kind of dropped the ball on, because unfortunately this year there did seem to be more than normal.
Yeah, this year seemed to be, from where I was standing in London, just looking on social media, from what I could see, this looked like one of the worst prides that's ever happened.
A lot of people were talking about it in those terms, certainly. So, as happened, I think it was Brighton Pride last year when it was Brittany playing, it was oversubscribed, essentially. So people were talking about waits to get into the Mayfield site where the live music was taking place. People who paid up to £70 a ticket were actually refused entry if they arrived after 7 p.m. Now, in fairness to Pride, they did put on the tickets, we have to stop letting people in at 7 p.m. and then some stewards were letting people in until 8 o'clock. But at the same time, it's like, why on earth would you... Okay, never mind.
So wait, they had a time limit for sold tickets?
Yeah. Essentially, if you bought a ticket, you had to be in there by a certain time or they wouldn't...
No gig anywhere does that. No gig says you can't come in after a certain point.
Yeah, nowhere does that. I don't think anywhere was looking, any of the people who were turned away would have necessarily looked for that on the ticket, because nowhere fucking does it. But the other problem is that in addition to those people who couldn't get any evening after a certain time, the event was actually really oversubscribed. It looks like Manchester Pride have actually oversold tickets for the Mayfield site. Punters have talked about queues lasting up to 3 hours to get both into Mayfield and into the village on the Saturday. Now, obviously on the Saturday of a Pride, to get into the music or whatever else, you do expect a certain amount of queuing and jostling and lots of people, but there is a limit for that. I think you've paid 70 quid for a ticket to go and see Ariana Grande, and it takes you 3 hours to get in. So speaking of Ariana Grande, she performed for less than 40 minutes as to what was advertised as a headline set. It's also worth pointing out that the majority of Ariana Grande's fans are actually under 18 who were not able to go into the Mayfield site at all. It was no under 18s. I think I could get tarred and feathered for pointing this out, but Ariana Grande has a connection to Manchester because, of course, she was performing when the bombing took place. The bombing of Manchester Arena a couple of years ago. It was at the very end of an Ariana Grande concert when that occurred. So that she has that slightly unfortunate and slightly tragic connection to the city, which I feel that connection was being exploited in a slightly cynical way. I feel, but that's probably just me. Now, subsequent to all of that, on the Sunday, I wasn't at Pride at all because I was doing a gig in Bradford at a goth festival. It was amazing. I had a tremendous time, and then I came back to Manchester and went to Pride for a bit on the Monday just to chill out in the village with my girlfriend. So that those little bits in terms of personal experience, that was actually very, very nice. And the weather held and all of that sort of thing. So obviously all of the things that had happened on the Saturday and all the problems with people actually, getting in to enjoy themselves remained. And questions were asked, and rightly so. Now, interestingly, with regards to the parade itself, Manchester Pride last year, in response to what happened in London, made the point that in the statement released in 2018, Pride Manchester said that if anybody attempted to, hijack the parade as we'd seen in London that year, they would be, and I quote, swiftly removed. But in 2019, a statement that was released after the events of this year's Pride, that had switched over to people have the right to protest. Which was interesting. I'm not sure what the difference was or what's changed the corporate mind, but the two statements do stand out from each other quite starkly, I would feel.
Yeah, I mean, people do have the right to protest, but I think the issue is that they were given a police escort to lead the fucking parade. I think there's a difference between protesting and being allowed to essentially be the headline act of the whole fucking thing.
Yeah, kind of. It's like it's not a good look, is it? And if it's not dealt with right, it can give people a really, really bad taste in the mouth. And unfortunately, I don't think it's been dealt with right. Now, it's worth pointing out as well, actually, that a number of people in the trans community were really quite deeply dissatisfied with the way Greater Manchester Police handled it on the day, and indeed the police's response to the criticism. To the extent that last week there was an extended consultation session with members of the trans community and members of Greater Manchester Police, which actually resulted in the trans representatives almost entirely, unanimously walking out of the meeting as a result of being so dissatisfied with the police and their failure to respond and dismissiveness at the meeting. And the people in question are, known to me. One of them was Christine Burns, who I would not really peg as somebody who would get up and storm out of a meeting like that for absolutely no reason. She's a very, 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 very level-headed operator, and that when that kind of came out, when she said that on Twitter, that was the action she'd taken, I was pretty stunned, because I was like, wow, it must have been really bad if it's prompted that. So all in all, although I had quite a nice time personally, it does seem to have been a bit of a balls up on a number of fronts.
Yeah, and there was lots of accusations about racism.
There were, yes, I was coming on to that. So that was unfortunate.
Oh, sorry.
No. And you're quite right to point it out, because, maybe it should have been higher up in the list. But no, you're absolutely right. I think Manchester Pride has frequently had, and I think a lot of Pride events have frequently had problems whereby, a racist incident occurs, and then maybe the security team, who are private security or whatever, haven't dealt with it particularly effectively, and things have escalated and so on. It was such a disappointment to see that again at Manchester Pride, and indeed being written by the BBC's LGBT correspondent Ben Hunt, who was obviously there and attending and experienced some of this racism for himself. So yes, I think that there are a number of things that Manchester Pride need to take some lessons from here. I don't think it's necessarily specifically been just a problem with giving a platform or sort of allowing transphobia to flourish somewhere. I think there are other things as well, in terms of accessibility, in terms of race, in terms of not oversubscribing your events and putting a damn time limit on the ticket. All sorts of little things like that. So yes, Ashleigh Talbot, What the Trans, Manchester Pride.
One of the not really that surprising in the context of the rest of the event being such a shit show, but I came across a tweet by Amru Al-Kadi, who, friend of the show, has been on the show before. They're a non-binary filmmaker and general performance queer artiste. And also, they're going to write an episode of the new Terry Pratchett show that's coming out, the one about the City Watch, which is going to be great. But anyway, they were saying online that they experienced essentially racial profiling by the security. There was a report by Ben Hunt for the BBC, the LGBT correspondent, who reported on a whole bunch of claims about racial prejudice at the event from various people. I mean, you've got the TERFs, you got the racism, you got the ableism. I don't know how many other isms they could have fit in one weekend. That's like...
Yeah, it's like you ticked ticked a whole bunch of the boxes there, haven't you? And not in a good way, unfortunately. You know, this is Manchester Pride. It was the first Pride I ever went to. It's in the city that I live in and that I love. I feel that I should point out that it was clearly not a complete shit show. You know, thousands of people attended and had like a super time and had no problems or whatever. But the fact that a small but, you know, any number of people attended and felt unsafe or felt excluded or felt victimized is a cause for concern, and I hope that they learn some lessons. I really do, because I want it to be a good event. I want it to work out really nicely. I want it to be a wonderful thing that the entire city of Manchester can come together and enjoy, and I don't want people to be excluded from it on any basis, essentially. So yes, there we go. That's Manchester Pride in the can. What's next?
Okay, next. So I went to Trans Plus Pride London, which I'm going to start by saying that I believe this event was a tremendous success, but it does have a tale behind it.
Indeed. Why don't you tell us the tale and spin us the yarn?
So, the tale of Trans Plus Pride London. It's an odd one, bear with me. Many months ago, I first heard of the event through the grapevine and was immediately excited. This was finally a trans pride I didn't have to travel for. I could just jump on a bus from outside my house and be marching and shouting within 45 minutes. I was going to have a trans pride in my town. Fucking A. The event had first billed itself as Trans and Intersex Pride London, which was a great thing because intersex communities, in my experience, don't tend to get included in trans events in spite of the fact that there are obvious crossovers, so it would make sense to have trans and intersex as, you know, a combined force. But anyway, at first this event looked like it was going to be incredible. The date was set for the 14th of September and I sat back and I waited for information to roll in. But then silence. For months we heard nothing about the event. The details on where the event would happen were vague. All that was known was it was going to take place somewhere in Hackney. Hackney, big borough of London, a lot of places it could have been, nobody knew specifically where. For a good while it was up in the air whether the event would take place at all because there was no information being put out. And then about a month ago things got weird. According to various online posts, the original organising committee had split into two different groups who were organising two different London Trans Prides for the same day.
Right.
The first, which had rebranded as Trans Plus Pride London, was billed as a protest march for the 14th, whilst the second was billed as being a full-on modern pride with a day in a park, stalls, stages and all the other stuff. This second one was also due to take place on the 14th until the organisers decided to cancel their event and concentrate on organising their event for 2020. So as you can see, things got very fucking confusing. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
You sound about as up there with it as I was before going. But to make matters more bizarre, the second group, the ones who were delaying their event, published on their social media a number of questions about the event that were still being organised for the 14th, the protest march. And these appeared to be valid concerns. They claimed that the roads weren't being closed, that the police weren't being informed, that stewards hadn't been trained, that Westminster Council had not been informed of the event, and this public spat got pretty nasty, and saw many trans people decide not to attend the protest march on the 14th. Clearly there was a lot of infighting going on between these two different trans prides, and very little information as to what the hell was actually going to fucking happen. I obviously shared the concerns going in. Whilst the issue of police at prides is a dicey one, the rules around holding a protest are fairly straightforward in here in the UK. Anyone can organise a protest anywhere without informing the police, unless the protest includes a march. If a march happens without informing the police, that means the police can show up on force and things can get nasty. This was my fear going in. If Trans Plus Pride London was going ahead without giving the police a heads up, that could be very dangerous for people showing up. This, along with concerns about accessibility, the fact that intersex had been dropped from the event name, the bad blood between the two different trans prides and everything else, it gave the impression this was going to be a total fucking shit show.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it, doesn't it? So what happened on the march itself then?
Well, I arrived with a friend of the show, Diana James. Hello, Diana, if you're listening.
Hi, babes.
Yeah, she came to stay with me. It was a good weekend. We've quickly become friends since she's been on the show. She's a great one. But anyway, we sort of arrived there about half an hour before it was due to start. At first, there was about maybe 100 people there, and I was just like, oh no, no one's going to show up. But then I saw that there were two groups of police on bikes So clearly the police had been informed and, got some information from them, and they were going to they were going to basically be at the top of the parade and behind the parade to basically sort of escort us around, and there was going to be people closing the road. So obviously those fears were unfounded. It appeared to be very, very well covered in that area where it came to getting permissions and all the other stuff. So the parade got off a little bit late, about 10 minutes late, but in queer time, that's nothing.
Yeah, that's pretty standard. Manchester Pride, I think it got going about 40 minutes after the start time that was written down, so yeah.
Yeah, I've never known a Pride parade start on time, but this one started a lot faster than I expected, and there was about 1,500 people there marching from Hyde Park. We went all the way up to Piccadilly Circus. People that don't know, that's where all the big, flashy adverts are. Usually shows up on postcards. And then we walked up Shaftesbury Avenue, which is basically sort of the road in between Chinatown and Soho. A lot of theatres there, right in the heart of London. We're talking central London here, proper central London. And there were thousands of people attending their touristy business all around, including a couple of cis boys who'd shown up on bikes holding up trans flags, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, they didn't join the parade. They clearly weren't there to join. They just wanted to show their support. So they just biked up from wherever they were and held the flags up. It brought a tear to my eye. It was beautiful. But yeah, there was lots of shouting, lots of chanting, and no floats, no corporations, no Skittles.
That's the dream.
No banks. It was everything I've wanted a Pride March to be for years. Yeah. It was just trans people shouting about trans issues. There were chants of trans stuff, intersex stuff, lots of chants about smashing the state in some cases, all about stopping deportations and a bunch of other issues that you don't tend to hear at your more mainstream Pride.
Don't.
It was a beautiful thing, and it all sort of topped off at Soho Square. Big old square in Soho, obviously.
Wonderful description.
Yeah, I mean, some people may not be aware of what Soho Square is, and now they know.
Thanks, Michelle.
That's all right. So everyone packed in there, and it was odd because in the square there was also a photo shoot or some kind of short film being shot for a fashion company. So on one half of it, you had this fashion shoot, which looked like it had some kind of Western theme. And on the other half, you had 1,500 trans people listening to some awesome speakers. Would you like to hear a couple of them?
Yes, I think I might. Yes, who's first?
So I recorded two of the speakers. First up, there's Izzy McCallum. Pronouns they, them. They're an intersex activist and queer artist based in London, and they had a lot to say on the issues facing the intersex community, and so here they are.
Hello! Can you all hear me all right? Fabulous. Okay, firstly I want to thank Lucia for organising Trans Plus Pride. Having it be inclusive for intersex people. We are highly misunderstood, neglected and underrepresented in public life, so trans and intersex solidarity is both incredibly touching but also beneficial, considering trans and intersex oppressions stem from the same system. Not that being intersex and being trans are mutually exclusive, of course. Nope. So intersex is a term used to describe someone whose biology doesn't fit the typical definitions of male and female. Being intersex is actually a healthy and natural biological variance. It's an umbrella term for several variations in sex characteristics. That's not to say that intersex people can't just identify as male or female, because obviously sex is distinct from gender identity, but that we do genetically fuck shit up. Intersex activists have long fought for acceptance. They have advocated to normalise their existence in a society that has traditionally treated them as people with disorders that need to be fixed. For intersex people, the results can be treatments or surgeries that are medically unnecessary, invasive, often without informed consent, or needless and irreversible operations done on babies and children, simply to make the child conform to a false binary. Of course, this isn't the only intersex narrative, but unconsensual, effectively cosmetic surgeries done on intersex children should be a human rights violation. In 2019, intersex people are still classified as disordered by the World Health Organization, and face significant gaps in legal protection here in the UK. Intersex people need more visibility. We exist, and just as importantly, we need people that aren't intersex speaking up with us. I truly believe that society's attitudes and laws can change, but we can't do it on our own. So, repeat these after me. Protect intersex kids.
Protect intersex kids!
End intersex surgeries.
End intersex surgeries!
Bodily autonomy now.
Bodily autonomy now!
So that was Izzy McCallum, who is an intersex activist and a queer artist. They use they, them pronouns. And I mean, yeah, it's kind of difficult to find fault with what was being said there, I feel. A lot of intersex issues are kind of approached quite cautiously within the trans community because you don't want to just tack it on and use intersex people as a kind of gotcha and whatever else. It's got to be done right. But what Izzy was talking about is absolutely bang on. It is, the surgeries are still being performed on intersex children to make them conform to society's expectation of gender one way or the other. And, fucking non-consensual surgery on anybody is kind of wrong, I feel. So, yeah, solidarity, love and solidarity. So, yeah. What did you think?
I thought it was great that Izzy was speaking, especially because
of all the stuff around the naming.
Label had been dropped out of the naming. Yeah, like it just been dropped off. And we will get into why that happened later, because I did get an answer on that. I did ask the organisers about that, and they did give me an answer, but we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, I mean, all of the speakers were very diverse. There was about 4 speakers, apart from the organiser, Lucia, who also spoke for a bit. But there was people of colour, non-binary people. It was far more intersectional than the speakers of Trans Pride Brighton, to put into a comparison. Like, there was a bit of criticism about how all the speakers for the event at Trans Pride Brighton were white and tended to be trans women. This was not the case with Trans Plus London. Like, this was not the case at all. There was a lot of talk of issues that I don't hear at enough prides. So that was nice. And so the second speaker I recorded was Travis Alabanza, pronouns they, them.
Yes, Travis is awesome. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, they absolutely are. You may be familiar with the name. They are a performance artist and all these other amazing things. They currently have a show that they are touring called Burgers. I've not had the chance to see it myself, but if you get the chance, go check it out, because it's got rave reviews, and everyone who's been to see it has said that it is incredible.
Including me.
Have you seen it?
Yes. So Burgers came to Manchester, I want to say last year. Yeah, sort of in the first round of touring, sort of tail end of last year. And it was outstanding, and I got to meet Travis at an event like beforehand, like a kind of talking circle kind of thing. But also then just kind of in the bar afterwards. It's like, oh, hi, how you doing? Performance is really good, I loved it. Kind of thing. Trying not to embarrass myself too much by talking to a really cool performance artist like Travis Alabanza. But yes, Burgers is brilliant, and you should all go and watch it, and I think we should probably just play the tape of the speech. What do you think?
Yeah, let's play the tape.
Hi, Trans Pride London! Trans rights are under attack! What do we do? Fight back! What do we do? Fight back! What do we do? Fight back! I firstly want to take this moment to recognise and hold space and cheer for not just Lucia, but I'm sure the army of people organising behind her as well. Thank you so much for bringing us all here. So important and so incredible. It's an honour to be under your leadership for this event right now. I also want to take a moment to say well done to everyone for surviving the biggest transphobic moment of today, the heat. What do we want? A suitable primer. When do we want it? Now. No, but in all seriousness, I think that all of us here know that right now we are under an epidemic of violence against trans people. And I don't use the word of epidemic violence lightly. I think that is true. I think right now what we have seen is a rise in violence both on the streets, in the media, in laws. What they are trying to do right now is silence us and stamp us out. And what we have to do is be louder. What we have to do is choose and decide that right now we will not sit quietly. We have seen a rise and an organised attack by the TERFs and the far right. They are organised, they are smart, they are clever, they have control of our media, and what we have to decide to do is wake up and be just as smart, be just as tenacious, be just as loud, and organise just as large. BBC reported last month that hate crime against trans people has gone up 83% in this country. But I do not think that is a shock to us. I believe we feel that on the streets. I believe that we feel that in our workplace. I believe we have known that truth for a long time. Statistics do not solve things. What will solve things is us and our actions. I wanted to remind us here that when we are here for Trans Pride, that for me, Trans Pride does not exist without fighting fascism. What we need to decide is that Trans Pride does not exist without ending racism. What we need to decide is Trans Pride does not exist without abolishing prisons. What we need to decide is that Trans Pride does not exist without stopping deportations. What we need to decide is that Trans Pride does not exist without decriminalising and censoring sex workers. And that overall, for me, at the core of a Trans Pride movement is a fight for consent. And what I mean is that we deserve to have autonomy and choice over our bodies. We deserve to have the consent to decide who we are, how we choose to live, and not face violence, stares, and persecution because of it. Most of all... Sure, I'll hold for the applause, bitch. What we most of all, I believe, have to choose, and I think this is poignant right now, is we have to choose and make the decision that we are not disposable. Meaning that none of us in this room right now are disposable, can be cancelled, can be got rid of, can be thrown out. We have to make a choice as a community to decide that actually we do not have enough people spare to send someone to a bad place. We do not have enough of us spare to not figure out restorative ways of working through our trauma, of working through our differences, of working through our conflict. Right now there are too many people banding together over their differences to fight against us, and we have to choose to listen, to hear each other, and choose to fight back stronger together. I want to end it on something that I truly believe. There is a lot of talk about colonisation and gender, and one thing that colonisation did when it went to countries that weren't theirs and lands that weren't theirs is to start colonisation to be successful. They took away the people in society that were most useful to those communities. They erased gender non-conformity, they erased the healers, they erased the medicine people, because they knew deep down that trans people were the gift, that trans people were the answer, that trans people are solving the very things that the world is frightened about fixing. And I want to say that I believe in so much of fear also comes desire, also comes want, also becomes a fear to choose the life that we are living. So with that, I want to end it on us saying very loudly that trans people are the gift. 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 Thank you so much. Happy Trans Pride.
Trans people are the gift.
Trans people are the gift.
Yeah, awesome.
Love it. Love it so much. They are really good at talking in crowds, which makes sense because of what they do for a living.
I mean, kinda, yeah. So that's how that works. And it's just making notes while listening to that, it's like they're absolutely right about the, and I would use the word epidemic of violence, to be perfectly honest. And we're not just talking sort of in the physical sense as well. It's like they're kind of...
There's a lot of it.
There is a lot of it, and it's consistently filtering through in the mainstream media, isn't it? And it's absolutely connected to other struggles and absolutely has to be the rise of the far right, and fighting fascism has to be a priority or we will lose it all. What was that phrase? There are too many people banding together against us. Was the phrase that I thought was fantastic from that. So, yeah, massive, huge amounts of respect for Travis Alabanza. And I should probably shut up because it sounds like I'm fangirling. Am I fangirling? I think I am. Anyway.
I mean, it's well deserved. Like, they deserve the fangirling over here.
Oh, yeah. I'll squee a little more. Sorry, carry on.
It's all good. So that gives you an impression of what the event was from those two speeches. Like, there was a lot of awesome chants, no corporate interest, and it was just a really nice atmosphere. Like, all of the bad words being spread around on social media and by the other organisation, that appeared to be entirely unfounded from where I'm standing. Like, accessibility seemed to be pretty good. Like, I talked to a couple of people who were a couple of disabled trans and non-binary people who were around, and they didn't say to me any issues they had. They seem to be able to get into the park all right. They seem to be able to get to the meeting point and get between the two perfectly fine. Right at the front, there was like 3 or 4 people in wheelchairs just going along, and they seem to be getting around okay. Obviously, if I've got this wrong, if any of you had any problems when you were there and you are disabled and, you had a shitty time, let us know on the Twitter @WhatTheTrans, and, we'll correct this. But from where I was standing, from the people I talked to, that angle seemed to be fine. It seemed to be that all of the angles were kind of covered, and this leads it nicely into my little interview I did with Lucia Blake. Lucia Blake is a trans woman who is part of Transmissions, a London-based trans collective organisation thing. They do nights all over the place. They're pretty great. She was the founder of Trans Plus Pride London, and I got to take some of my concerns to her, and so here it is. Lucia Blake, founder of Trans Plus Pride UK. How is it going?
It's going great, yeah. It's honestly it's much better than I ever hoped for. The sun's out, the march went smoothly. We got to talk about things like intersex rights, the deportation of trans people, in central London, shouting that to tourists and civilians. So hopefully we've been able to raise some conversations and put some unity, strength and inspiration back into the trans community.
As you are probably very much aware, there was a lot of stuff on social media about how this was, people were claiming that there was not being very well organised, that the police weren't being informed. Obviously, from what I've seen today, that hasn't been the case. It's gone off incredibly smoothly. Yeah. Where do you think this stuff came from?
So I'm not, obviously, not naive. The organisation could have been better. There were a lot of internal problems on the committee with organising. And then there's also just a lot of opposition from people wanting to start their own trans prides next year, which I wish them good luck. It's no skin off my back, but there was a bit of scaremongering from people with intent to take this over and pinkwash it and make money from it. Luckily enough, we defended it from people like that, and we're able to keep it a day where no corporations are involved, where the spotlight were not hidden behind a Barclays float, where they are, where the focus of attention and the conversations raised will be created by us.
Cool. When it comes to, the march was previously called Trans and Intersex Pride, but the intersex part has been was removed at some point. Why did that happen?
Okay, so without delving into the internal falling out of the original committee, when this march was announced, it was supposed to be alongside the Hackney event and both under the umbrella of London Trans and Intersex Pride. The Hackney event then told us that we had to remove intersex because they had that name and they didn't want to be associated with us. So then we were like, we thought it didn't make sense to have 2 different names, so we were like, we'd rather use intersex. They were like, no, please don't, we'll be 2 different events. So then we were kind of like, because they were already putting out statements about us and slandering this event, so we were like, alright, let's just try and keep them happy. Hopefully we can, by putting intersex speakers on the panel and by putting out statements that the plus stands for intersex, hopefully we can reassure people that intersex people are at the forefront of this pride. And if you was here today, you'd know we're chanting about intersex people the whole way.
Yeah, and you had an intersex speaker and stuff, so I think you had your bases covered, which is a damn shame by the sounds of it that there was a big old... Because the event was first announced in March, was that right? It was going to be in Hackney, and then internal politics came into that. Is that going to be a factor in the future? Are you going to be, next year, are you going to be working with these groups, do you think? Do you hope to work with these groups to...
If I'm honest, no, because we've been working with people like Voices for this year briefly, and I'd rather focus on the organisations that have came to support this march today, because it's clear that they have the same intent. We won't be working with any organisers that made this process more difficult than what it needed to be, and who then cancelled their events and slandered us. It was really unnecessary, and there's a bigger picture here, and that is the rights of trans people, and people shouldn't be focusing on little riff-raff falling outs in the community.
Well, I've got to say, good day.
Yeah.
Well done, seriously. Like I just said before I started recording, I was
was looking at all of the stuff online just like, oh God, I don't want to be reporting that this went wrong. I don't want to tell people that this thing sucked. I want to tell the listeners that this is something awesome, and thank you for making it so.
It's just such a shame, because I know there is a lot of people who never came today because of the people spreading like uninformed information on the internet, and I know they're going to regret that they never came today when they see the press of how incredible it was and how happy everyone is now just in the sun in Tower Square. But we will be doing this again next year, and we will have better communication with people. We are sorry about like the lack of communication.
Yeah, that was an ongoing concern, but I think, I mean, as far as I can see, you did a pretty good job today. Communication could be better, like you said, but yeah, well done. So what are you going to do next? What are you going to do right now?
So right now I'm just going to go and catch up with friends and family, because my mum's came down from Liverpool.
Love it.
My friend Maria has flew over from LA, so yeah, I'm going to go and catch up with people, enjoy the sun, maybe have a glass of wine, and get ready for the after party tonight, which is at the garage, and I'll have a Stephen Brook candy and loads of trans performers from within the community.
That'll be brilliant. That'll be a good night. Unfortunately, I won't be there because I'm boring and old, but have fun for me, will you?
Well,
All
thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for trusting in the event and coming despite what you read online.
It's all good.
So she answers the question about the intersex thing. Like, it seemed to have been dropped entirely for a branding issue rather than for anything else. But then they did put front and center a incredible intersex activist, and there were plenty of chants all the way through. I know because I was there. I even managed to lead one of them at one point.
Wow.
Which was quite fun. And by lead, I mean I basically shouted a bunch of people. Diana James, who was there, who is also intersex, she basically took the mic and started a chant. And I sort of went further a little bit behind and just started going, right, you're going to chant this now. It's the intersex people's turn. Go. And it was pretty great. I was a cheerleader for intersex people for about 10 minutes.
Nice. I approve. You see, that's being an ally.
I did my best. I could probably do a hell of a lot more with intersex stuff, but, you know, we should do a Sean, actually. Why don't we do a Sean?
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of crossover, and yes, that's probably something for us to discuss. But again, we don't want to just go in all half-cocked now, do we? We want to get everything right and make sure we are getting across the right information, rather than just saying, yeah, we can do an intersex thing and we don't have to think too hard about it, because that's, you know, let's not get complacent about it, is what I'm saying. But
what you're saying is we shouldn't do it right now.
Well, I'm just saying we probably shouldn't plan it right now when we're in the middle of recording a different episode.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Well, in that case, if any intersex people listening, intersex people who are trans or intersex people who are not trans or whatever, hit us up on the Twitter and yeah, let's do a thing. Let's get the right information.
Let's have a word.
But yeah, overall, I'd say the event gets my seal of approval, and in a lot of ways, it was the event that it is the pride that I've always wanted.
Good.
Except for the lack of communication and what sounds like a whole bunch of infighting, and yeah, less of that. I really hope that, even though Lucia said that she is unwilling to work with the people that made things difficult for her now,
which, you know, that's fair.
It's fair, but I kind of hope that there is some kind of peace, because it sounds like...
Are you kidding? This is London. There are always just more people there. It's fine. Anyway.
Fair enough. But I just don't want to sound like I'm shitting on this other group, this other committee, because I don't know what their deal is. They haven't had an event yet, so I can't judge them. I would quite like the trans community to come together and work on a pride together without this infighting, because I got the sense that there was a lot of trying to compete to be the first one to become the main trans pride London, because there's been a gap for years, and there's got to be some kind of something sexy about being the people that do it, but by being the London trans pride.
Yes. I mean, I get it, but I mean, you know, respectfully, and I think this is kind of inner M25 syndrome again, but this kind of inter-community fighting that was visible, you know, between different groups in London to try and get this organised was visible to the trans people in the rest of the country, and we were just like, oh, for Christ's sake, guys, fucking pull it together, will you?
I was exactly the same. Like, I genuinely thought it was going to be a complete fucking car crash, and I was so glad
it wasn't.
To be wrong.
Absolutely.
I've never been more glad to be wrong in this case. But I really hope they sort it out. I really hope, you know, the next one has got less of that and more solidarity and more working together.
Basically, and that's a pretty solid note to end that one on, I would say. So, Yeah. Awesome. So that is the conclusion of the news, and that was fairly poor English given the context. No, that's enough of the news for this week. I think there were a couple of other things that happened which deserve a bit of an honourable mention. So Catherine O'Donnell, who we mentioned, who was the former night editor of The Times, who was suing The Times for transphobic discrimination, actually lost her case at the Edinburgh Employment Tribunal, but does plan to appeal it. More details on that later. And Casta Semenya, who you may remember we reported on this, the issue surrounding her as a cis woman competing, but being told that she had to medicate in some way in order for her to be less good at her job, and she has refused to do that and taken up a career in professional football instead. So brilliant, fantastic, and more power to Casta Semenya for doing that. Don't bow to the bullies, no matter what form they pretend to take. So
yeah, she used to be a professional footballer before she took up athletics many years ago. So it's not like out of nowhere she just decided to become a soccer player just out of the blue. This is more like her going back to her old job because her new job has become a load of horseshit thanks to various groups who seem really adamant to stop someone who's really good at their job from doing their job for reasons that are completely unknown. Like, there is obviously no obvious reason why a bunch of white-run organisations would try to get in the way of a black athlete from performing, but whatever.
It is quite the mystery. So yes, honourable mentions to those and more particularly on the O'Donnell story as that develops. However, for the chunky, meaty part of the podcast before we end the show, we're going to talk about something that has definitely been on my mind recently, and it's employment, essentially. It's jobs and shit. So over the time we've been doing this podcast, both of us have had pretty wildly varying experiences of being in employment. For the overwhelming majority of the time, I've had a full-time job, but this has recently changed, as I've mentioned. So I am now back on the old job seeker malarkey, which kind of sucks, to be honest. But I have had a little more time to catch up on my reading, so I guess that's nice. And obviously, Michelle has been through some changes too. And, Michelle?
Well, for full disclosure, I started the podcast with no job. I sort of wanted to start a podcast because I had nothing going on. I was sat at home being all mentally ill and on benefits, and just basically messaged you saying, let's do a thing. And this is how this podcast came about. But since then, my situation has changed a little bit because I have a couple of part-time jobs now. I'm facilitating a mental health recovery course thing. I'm also editing podcasts for the Rusty Quill. You should check out all their podcasts, by the way, because they are great, especially if you want into the gaming and the history and the sci-fi and the comedy. They do all of that, and it's pretty good stuff. I've been listening to a lot of it, obviously, because I've been editing it, and it's all solid stuff, so go check that out. But yeah, I've got a couple of jobs now that are part-time. Still a benefits person, but I sort of got those jobs through, I guess, sort of word of mouth, people noticing the show or people noticing me about doing other things. So I didn't really have any real formal job interviews. Well, I did for Rusty Quill, but it was very much I was recommended for the role by someone I know. So it wasn't the same as like going through filling in a job application, handing it in, then going to some office in my best suit. You know what I mean?
Your A-grade job interview dress. Yeah. So the point is, you and I have kind of flipped in that sense, in that you've actually got a job now and I don't. So, but all of which has got me thinking recently. So there are usually figures floating around for LGBT and trans people who are in employment and their experiences. Indeed, Stonewall produced a report detailing exactly this in 2018. But from there, you kind of have to ask the question, what about trans unemployment? To what extent does being trans prevent people from getting into a job in the first place? So, looking around for some information around this, I found a report by some group called The Government, which stated that trans people were less likely to have had a paid job in the 12 months leading up to the survey. 65% of trans women and 57% of trans men were in employment, which does still leave a fairly sizable portion who were not. Now, this report, the LGBT Action Plan report, I think, also includes a statement from one survey respondent who is a trans woman. I am unemployed and I struggle to get work. Prior to transitioning, this was never an issue. I have tested this by applying to more than 30 jobs announcing that I'm trans, to which I received no interest, and I did the same again, but withheld the fact that I'm trans, and suddenly I got interviews. All of which seems to hint at something I think the trans community is aware of already. It can be a lot harder to find work when you come out as trans. And I think anecdotally, this does seem to be true simply based on my own experiences.
Is this something you're finding at the moment, now that you are looking for work?
Okay, so on that then, obviously I've had to go through universal credit, so I've had to deal with the Department for Work and Pensions, which is a Sisyphean ordeal in itself. But I was kind of recently surprised by something that happened at the job centre, whereby I was asked directly, yet quite sensitively, about dysphoria and did that have an impact on the way I was conducting my job search and the kind of jobs that I was looking to apply for, which kind of stunned me because I was like, well, that's a very sensitive question to ask and I'm glad you asked it, but I was so not expecting that from this meeting at the job centre. So clearly there's a certain amount of nuanced thinking that's going out in the training. I don't think I have yet come up against a situation where my being trans has kind of immediately gotten me dismissed from a role simply because I haven't fired enough applications off for that to be the case yet. I've only sent off a couple of them have been so I had an interview the other week, which I wasn't successful for. Since then, I've applied for 3 jobs, all of which still haven't closed. So I'd still be waiting for a little while before I'd hear back from them anyway. So I don't think it's come up yet. I'll let you know. Obviously, if anything does seem to come up whereby I apply to something and then get in touch with them on the phone and mention being trans and then all of a sudden I never hear from them again, that's a data point, isn't it? Yeah, what's your experience of this, Ben? Have you found that it's kind of made it harder at times? I mean, I know we've both kind of had experiences within different kinds of employment which have not been positive, which we'll come on to in a minute, but like in between those shit jobs.
So I've had trouble here. I have had periods of unemployment where I wasn't sick, where I was actively looking for work, and I have been told by several potential employers that they were not really looking to employ me because they didn't know what customers would think.
Yes, so that's one I've heard as well, but carry on.
Yeah, that happened several times, and even at some... And the fact that these were all customer facing was only because those were the only people that were getting back to me at this point. Like, I had 8 years in this whole other industry. Like, I was no slouch when it came to that kind of thing, you know? Like, I wasn't the best at it because I kind of fucking hated it, but I was going for jobs in, like, post-production video technical shit, which isn't my thing at all, but, you know, you got to pay the bills. And I wasn't getting anything. I didn't get a single interview, which was strange because I was putting on there that I was trans, and there had been times where I'd gone for interviews before at other video techie places when I was still in my old job, and I was getting interviews. And there was one point where I did get an interview, and then I didn't even hear from them ever again. Now, they could have all been because they thought I was garbage. But I don't think that was necessarily the case because there was a lot of times where I fit the criteria of the job and didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, and you do kind of wonder. And now, that's not to say that never ever happens to, you know, cis people. With the way the employment market is at the moment, a fairly common complaint is that you spend hours and hours a day knocking your head against a wall, sending out these job applications, and you literally don't hear anything from anybody ever, and it's extremely demoralizing. However, when you are trans as well, you do kind of have to wonder, okay, so is that happening more often, and is that why? And just to pick up on what you said about the company saying, oh, well, yeah, we'd love to employ you, but we just don't know what the customers would think. To me, that sounds like they're trying to cloak their own insecurities and own kind of discomfort with the existence of trans people and trying to then say, oh, well, no, it's not me, it's the customers you see there, you know, and we don't want to put anybody in a vulnerable position to where, you know, they don't want to be responsible for someone's mental health breakdown because they're constantly being abused by the customers or whatever, you know. It does kind of make you wonder to what extent that is taking place. Now, it's worth noting that this kind of discrimination is actually against the law. it's discrimination, whether that is what it's perceived to be or not by the person who is looking to hire somebody. Even if you are kind of indirectly saying, oh, well, that sounds complicated, so I'm not gonna phone that person back because it sounds like it's complicated and whatever, then you have just indirectly discriminated against somebody. And you might be thinking, oh, well, it's not because they're trans, it's not, but I'm not sure what allowances we need to make, and I'm not sure the company's ready to do that, and I'm not sure the business, and blah, 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 and excuse after excuse. But the fact is, it is discrimination.
Yeah, the thing is that I got the words from these employers saying, we don't know how the customers will react to you, from basically shops that I was applying to at this point, because jobs in my old field just weren't happening. So if that's happening with the shop jobs, it's probably also happening behind closed doors with the other jobs. Like, it could be said that I may be having some sour grapes and just being like, my application wasn't strong enough, I'm just saying, oh, it's because I'm trans, innit? But then I have actual practical fucking evidence of being essentially turned down for being trans from people who clearly didn't know the law that much, or they did and knew that I could do nothing about it, what with being unemployed and having no money. Yes. So how could it be that I don't think that it was just a customer service industry thing. I think it's very much, it has to be a thing that applied to both the fields I was looking at.
Yeah. Essentially. Okay, so let's just go through just quickly what some guidance about it actually says. So there's talking about, if you are trans, at what point should you disclose that? Should you ever disclose that? Do you particularly need to? You'd like to think no. For myself, because a lot of the jobs that I apply for are kind of hippy-dippy, either arty or, LGBT charity-based type thing, I will absolutely mention the work and volunteering that I have done. And from that, it is extremely easy to infer that I may be trans myself. So, I think some people with CVs like that, with that kind of experience, although it is kind of a good thing that they say to go and get a volunteer job or whatever, again, some people might be seeing that on a form and just thinking, oh, well, we'll put that one in the maybe pile, and then the maybe pile becomes the no pile because,
It's just like on Facebook, if you say that you're interested in an event, you're not going to the event.
Yeah.
Interested in maybe, you might as well just say no.
You might, yeah, pretty much. So in terms of disclosing, you don't actually have to. You're under no legal obligation to disclose details around this unless there is a genuine occupational requirement related to the job. And it's kind of difficult for me to conceive of what one of those might consist of. And an employer as well, if they want to kind of ask about that, they must show that the requirement to discriminate is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, which is, of course, the phrase from the Equality Act. And again, that's a very, very hard test to pass. It is very interesting because there are, of course, some employers who might not going to be, who are perhaps not going to be aware of the law. And so it's not necessarily coming from a place of malice, but it is coming from a place of ignorance. So, for example, I've heard a lot of stories of people who have gone in for a job interview and have been just straight out asked for their gender recognition certificate. And it's like, well, we need that. I was like, well, you don't, because A, most trans people don't have one. B, I don't have one. And C, no, you fucking don't need it. And D, if I did have one, it would be illegal for you to ask to see it. But yeah, apart from all of those things, yes, just come right out and ask about the certificate.
So when it comes to, let's say that you go through all of this and you get a job.
Yes.
Obviously, I think every trans person listening to this, every non-binary person listening to this, will have a story about being treated like crap by their job, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I've got one. Literally first day of a job I started in 2017. And so I met the person that I was to be working under. And then as we were sort of stood outside on literally first break, so 2 hours into the day, and she just straight up asked me, have you had the operation? But she did the thing where, where she pointed down to her genitals and said, oh, have you had, the op? And she said it quietly, even though there was 3 or 4 other people stood with us in this little group, right? So I have then got to A, explain that that's actually a really, really personal question. B, I've then got to try and answer the question, but I've also got to remain completely civil and be very, very nice to her about it because it's my first day and she's my line manager. It's like, wow. Was not expecting that on literally day one. You kind of think it'll kick in after about a week.
Yeah, and it's so unfair, with the power balance, right?
Right.
They hold all the cards. It's when I've been asked that at social events, and I have gone into things and explained why that's inappropriate, people have said, well, Michelle's a bit passive-aggressive about this issue. Clearly there's some stuff going on. And I'm like, there's no good way to answer this question. Either you answer it truthfully, but nicely, but then you risk going into so much detail it freaks the people out asking, which, you know, if you aren't prepared to hear that kind of stuff, don't ask about someone's junk.
Yeah.
Or if you come off as any kind of combative in that, no, please don't ask me about my junk in front of loads of people, that makes you look bad.
Yeah,
or
it's
at least
like
makes people think badly of you, so you can't win. Either way, you're going to come out of that question, especially with somebody who's over you, who has power over your life. It's just so unfair.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, you know, later on in the same week, she then sort of, we had a meeting, like, you know, the whole team meeting. And then she said, oh, look, Ashleigh, I'm sorry I said guys in the meeting. And she sort of pulled me across to one side. I was like, okay, look, you've gone too far the other way now, because there were cis women in the meeting that you weren't bothered about offending by that. Just calm down, all right? If something comes up, I'll tell you, as I have done, you know, but just... chill out, will you? Sometimes it's chill out, and sometimes it's like, you know, fucking do more, will you? But, you know, I'm not going to lie, I've gotten quite lucky with the jobs, or some of the jobs that I've had. I'm white and embarrassingly middle class, and I've got a certain amount of experience literally being a gobby trans person, and it turns out in certain roles, certain very specific roles that don't come along very often, but nevertheless they exist, in certain roles, that's actually helpful.
I've had some very, very strange experiences in certain jobs. After my journalism stuff dried up in 2016, I started applying for different jobs, and I finally got one at a McDonald's in South London.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the fourth McDonald's I'd applied to. And the other three decided that I wasn't right for the role, and this fourth one did, which I think suggests that an element of the, oh, I don't know if my customers will be able to deal with this came up with the other three. I don't know for sure. The McDonald's in South London didn't ever say that outright because they just didn't get back to me ever again. But I find it very, very strange that one McDonald's thought I was okay and the other three didn't. But anyway, that's by the by.
Yes.
In the job, for the record, working at McDonald's sucks anyway, no matter who you are. It is the worst job I've ever had, despite all of the transphobic shit that I'm going to get into. It is just awful to the point where the boss at this place, sort of, without saying so directly, demanded that people come in for free to count up the safe and do all these other jobs for him, with the golden carrot being offered of a position on the management track.
Right.
So it was a really shitty place to work, no matter who you are. But then I was there, trans, on the drive-through, getting abuse from customers all the time. Constantly misgendered by staff. A lot of the staff were very cool. A lot of the staff were very much not cool. One of my supervisors, when I was on the tills, kept referring to me as Michael.
Right. And
which is bizarre because that was never even my fucking dead name. I have no idea where they got that from.
Just wanting to be a dick, I assume. So,
well, in her defense, although actually no, I'm not going to fucking defend her, but I don't think it was necessarily a conscious thing with her. I think it wasn't malicious.
No excuse.
She apologized for it a couple of times, but it was just always there. It's just like, oh, this job is shit.
Look, if you're really sorry about it, stop fucking doing it. So.
Yeah, and it got to the point where in the end I just walked out of the job because I had a doctor's appointment. I was in the middle of losing my mind at the time as well.
Yes.
Like, this was very much where it was becoming apparent that I could not work. And I was trying to work. I tried to work 3 or 4 different jobs before realising I couldn't. So it wasn't like I was trying my damnedest to work.
I know, I remember.
They were saying... But then I had an appointment with a psychiatrist. I've been waiting for months. I had to go to this appointment. And at the end of my shift, the supervisor was like, well, no, you have to stay because the other person hasn't showed up. And I was like, yeah, but I suppose I finished now. And they were like, yeah, well, you can't go. And I was like, so you're saying that if I go now, I will be in trouble with you? And they said, well, yes. So I walked out.
Yep, that's fair.
I walked out and didn't go back because fuck McDonald's, fuck all of that. But yeah, that just shows that like the things that trans people need in jobs, like to be able to leave on time to go to a medical appointment. And obviously trans people are more likely to suffer from mental health issues, from physical health issues, and are also going to sometimes need to go halfway across the country to go to a gender clinic or something. Those reasonable adjustments were not being made for me and tend not to be made for trans people and are sometimes even held against them.
I mean, you could look at Catherine O'Donnell's case, couldn't you? The fact that she's trans definitely did not help her out. You know, because even once you're even in a job, if you're in a job that's kind of institutionally problematic, then that's gonna not be good. It's going to affect your mental health. It's going to have an impact on, like, oh, well, I actually just kind of don't want to go into this today. So, but then, equally, just sort of winding it back to the point of, where you're looking for the job, right? So the sort of position that I found myself in is I'm filling in job application forms for all sorts of different roles, not just sort of LGBT charity stuff. There's stuff that's firmly within my administrative skills wheelhouse that I've been applying for as well. And one of the forms that I sent off actually just last week, on its equality and diversity metric gathering bit of the application form, had literally the most badly worded way of phrasing the question, are you trans, essentially. And it's like, do you wish to be known by another gender from the one you were assigned at work? It's like, oh yeah, so that's me just wishing, is it, rather than being. So I sent that form off with a small amount of feedback attached about that particular issue, and I am not expecting to hear back from them on that basis. But like, I couldn't stop myself. I wasn't just gonna not, right? Like, so I'm not sure I'm doing myself any favours, but at the same time, it's like, well, no, that sucks. And that's why people are being put off from applying here, because they say in big letters, oh, we welcome applications from all sectors of the community, and we want to collect this information to see where our applications are coming from. And it's like, well, if you're not getting many trans people applying, the fact that your question is so shittily phrased is probably why. Just a thought there. That organisation I applied to.
I mean, if they listen to this show, you're definitely not getting the job now.
I haven't said which organisation it was. So, it's fine. It could be any of them. I'm not going to say it, just on the off chance. You've made me paranoid now. So,
but yeah, so we've covered the difficulties around seeking employment and how the cards are definitely stacked against trans people in regards to meeting trans people's individual needs, as well as letting trans people through the door. On the job, I think we're all familiar with the complications that can come up, what with being the only trans person at the place you're working, which is, chances are, you're probably
Usually
going to be, unless you work for an LGBT organisation or in a particularly woke industry like the arts, which is not always that accessible to people. Like, jobs in the arts are, as you know very well, Ashleigh, are very, very well sought after. It took you many years. In all the years I've known you, it took you many years to break in.
Well, in fact, in my defense, I wasn't actually trying. Trying to sort of break into the arts. Like, I got that job fairly by accident. It was like, it came up at a point when I needed one. I applied for it. I got it. Brilliant. I was the only trans person in the organisation. Although once it came to actually doing the festival and everything, we had volunteers, a large number of volunteers, as you might imagine, and some of them were trans. But yes, in terms of being the trans person in the office, that was me. And that's going to be the case almost certainly for most small to medium-sized organisations, unless, as you say, it's a specifically LGBT or trans-focused organisation of some description. So it's, it can all be a bit of a mess, and it can all be rather confusing, can't we? So, but we did dig out some useful things for a bit of advice for searching out, to help you, if you're a trans person who's looking for a job, maybe find the right employer, essentially. So a couple of things you might want to look for if you're concerned about, well, I don't know if I want to work for these people. This should have, or any organisation worth its salt, should have an equal opportunities policy. And especially it's an idea to look for policies that relate to the recruitment of trans people and the retaining of those trans people. Do have a look at terminology that people have used. The use of the term gender identity is generally considered the most appropriate term. Look out for employers who might have received awards, like for a long time there was the Press for Change Award for Equal Opportunities, which and I'll quote here directly, which demonstrates a company's positive commitment to recruiting trans people, although it actually, the source that we're using here actually uses the word transsexual throughout, so I'm just translating that in my head every time I read across for it. But there are also things like the Stonewall Diversity Champions and various other community awards, community practices, obviously that doesn't just apply to being trans as well. And do they do things like a specialist event? Like, do they specifically make a show of their diversity? You can identify employers who might be who are more committed to getting employees in from different and diverse backgrounds. So see what engagement that's been done. It might be worth having a look on their social media, on their Twitter, to see if they've engaged in any events or if they've put out a shout out for, say, Bi Visibility Day or whatever. There are a few ways of doing a bit of research about whether a company is ostensibly trans friendly. Of course, if you phone them up and say, hey, listen, are you trans friendly? They're not going to explicitly say, oh, no, we're not going to hire you degenerate. Because that's the sort of thing that can get an organization in quite a lot of trouble. But there are a couple of interesting ways that you might be able to get a sense of if it's worth applying to somewhere or not.
So that info that Ashleigh just read out there, that came from the University of Bath Career Service. Basically, we were doing some research on advice for trans and non-binary people on how to navigate the job world, and this was the only real thing we could find that really went into any kind of depth on it. So we will link to that in the description so you can read the full thing for yourself. But yeah, they have a lot of information there that is very useful for the trans people who are looking for jobs. Certain phrases that you will probably need to know when it comes to working out whether your workplace or your potential workplace has been treating you unfairly. These are the definitions taken directly from the Equality Act. There are many different kinds of unlawful discrimination. These include direct discrimination, which is unnecessarily requiring someone not to be transsexual. There is indirect discrimination, where transsexual people, as they say, the Equality Act really needs updating on this anyway, but yeah.
God, doesn't it?
But yeah, indirect discrimination, where transsexual people are particularly disadvantaged by provision or some criteria which applies to everyone. For example, something like all employees need to bring in their birth certificate and live by that gender, I guess, would be indirect discrimination, because that's clearly that's clearly going to discriminate against trans people. Discrimination by perception, where you think someone is trans and you discriminate against them because of it. That's for people who are cis, who people assume are trans. By association, if you discriminate against someone for mixing with or having an association with trans people. And also there's harassment, which everybody knows what that is. Discrimination and harassment, all of that stuff that comes into the same thing. Those are the different kinds of discrimination that you can suffer. And if you do, then they are breaking the law, and you can seek legal recourse if you are able to. Now, most people are not going to be able to do that because seeking legal recourse costs thousands of pounds, but there are places you can go. There is the lawworks.org.uk and Citizens Advice. They will both hopefully sort you out with places to go and point in the direction of some wonderful pro bono things, and maybe even be able to give you legal advice directly. I will provide links to those in the description. So yeah, check those out if you need it. And obviously, do not take anything we've said on this podcast as legal advice, because me and Ashleigh are laughably not at all legal experts.
Very much not, yes.
I mean, think between us, we have broken more laws between us than we have understood.
That sounds fairly... Yeah, that tracks. Gosh, as if that's the case. I
mean, there's a lot of laws out there, and I've had to read lot of like the legal mumbo jumbo of acts directly, legal acts, and they're not easy to understand.
No, they are not.
I'm not surprised that people have to go to school for a decade to understand laws.
Yeah, that's very, very true. So, if you are a trans person who is unemployed or underemployed, that's another thing that seemed to be happening quite widely in the trans community and has done for a while, whereby you have a trans person who is qualified or has worked in some sector for a long time and has either then transitioned or simply as a result of their pre-existing trans status are unable to actually find a job of the sort that their skills would warrant, and they end up having to pick up some time in a shop or doing data entry or doing something which is kind of below their skills and experience, but is the only thing that was available to them. And there's also the whole underemployment question when it comes to people in 0 hours contracts. The government will love to present the idea that, look, more people than ever have jobs. And it's like, yes, and most of those jobs are 0 hours contracts. So people still aren't earning enough to live on, even though more people have jobs. Just a little thought there for you. But if you're in this situation, don't lose heart. There are options if you feel you are discriminated against or treated poorly. There are ways that you can, push back against that. And we'll all try and make it out of this capitalist hellscape together. Woo!
Yeah, I really want to point out that there are a whole bunch of awesome employers out there that are totally down with trans stuff. Like, I want to do a shout out to the Rusty Quill again, because they have treated me with nothing but respect. They've not done any of the things that we have mentioned here as the bad things that employers tend to do. They've not singled me out in any way for being trans, either good or bad. I'm just another employee. What I'm saying is that there are some wonderful employers out there. I've had some great jobs with people, like my time with Pink News was pretty great. They were obviously very cool with trans people. You have had some very, very trans-inclusive jobs in your time, Ashleigh, as you've told me before.
I sure have, yes.
These places are out there. You can have a fulfilling work life without dealing with a whole bunch of extra bullshit. Those things are possible. It just may take you a little longer to find them. So I'm also talking to you here, Ashleigh. Don't lose heart. Keep going. And if you've got some trans friends who are a little bit underemployed or unemployed and need a helping hand, throw a few jobs their way. Ask some questions at your work if your work is awesome. Let's help each other out.
And that is a wonderful ethic on which to leave this particular episode, I think.
Oh, but there's one thing. Do not work for McDonald's.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
Work if you are stuck in a position where you can only really get jobs at fast food chains, go for anyone but McDonald's. Go for an independent. Go for Morley's Chicken. They're a big brand in London. I don't know if they're any outside of London, but
Literally never heard of them, honey.
Well, there's Morley's all over London. Go work for them instead of McDonald's, because I'm sure they're probably better.
Okay. Well, yes, thank you for joining us for our first episode after a break. Sorry if it's been a little bit janky, but we're still kind of getting used to getting back into the thing, and Brexit is confusing and everything's just terrible. But let's not lose heart. Everything is basically fine.
So yeah, before we go, I'd just like to plug a little thing, because I've started a whole new show. I've been cheating on you, Ashleigh.
You absolutely have, you treacherous harpy.
So yeah, I'm part of a new show called the Trans Variety Hour, where basically different trans folks present different shows all under that banner. So I have a show on there called the Trans Mental Health Explosion.
It's a wonderful name. It's a wonderful title. Well done. I love it.
Oh, thanks. I just thought that you were going to be like, yeah, that's clearly something Michelle came up with, because when I name things, they tend to have explosion in it. I don't know why. I just like that word.
I mean, obviously I picked up that it was you that named it, but I'm fully in support of it. Anyway, so the Trans Mental Health Explosion, carry on.
Yep, it's a show that is being presented by Spectra, who are a LGBTQIA plus organisation that promotes well-being in the community.
And not, as you might have thought, the baddies from the James Bond film Spectre.
No, they are very, very different. Their aims are very different. You may, if you have ever been to any kind of a Pride event or any kind of LGBT event in London, you've probably seen them giving out condoms. They're very good people, promoting all sorts of well-being stuff. They wanted to put together a bunch of podcasts. So me and Jacob, a non-binary broadcasting genius, and I don't say that lightly, they are a genius, I've sort of put this whole thing together. So you can check it out if you search for Trans Variety Hour on wherever you get your podcast from. You should check it out, because I get to talk to trans and non-binary people about being... about mental health issues, which is something that I am very experienced in, and I talk to a whole bunch of people, and we get deep. The aim of the show is for you to sit back and listen and say to yourselves, thank God it's not just me. So if that sounds like something you want, go check out that thing. And Ashleigh, now that I've done my plug, do you have a thing that you can plug? Please plug something so I don't sound completely self-obsessed.
Yes, I will. And even though I've spent the last episode, well, several episodes really, dunking on London, I do have a gig there. At Electroworks on October the 5th, myself and my comrades from Dead Pixel will be doing a gig supporting biomechanical. That's the one, biomechanical. And it's all sort of weird and trippy and industrial and gothy and dark. And you should absolutely come along. 3 awesome bands, £10, October 5th, Electroworks, London. I'm done.
And I will be there.
Yeah, wouldn't that be fun? So please goth up. I absolutely want to see you goth up.
I don't really have anything gothy. Like,
tough. Dye your shit black with boot polish if you have to, alright?
I own black
I
clothes.
want to see some darkness, O'Toole.
I got a black maxi skirt lying around somewhere. That seems like a gothy thing, right?
That'll do. I mean, similar to what I might be wearing myself, to be perfectly honest. We're going to have to make sure we don't clash, or one of us is going to have to go home and change. Anyway, yes, so come to gig, listen to Michelle's podcast, and obviously do tune in for our next episode in 2 of your Earth weeks.
And it will be 2 weeks. We are back.
Yes, we are back. So yes, goodbye.
See you soon. Ta-ta.